Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to Unaffiliated Sports Broadcast, or USB, where we cover Tooele County, Utah high school sports, focused at the moment on varsity football for Grantsville High School, Tooele High School, and Stansbury High School. I hope you enjoyed the previews and the recaps. Thank you for your support, but be sure to get out there and show that support to these athletes, as they're the ones who truly deserve it, and we're just trying to give them a little bit of light for whatever little bit of platform we can provide. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, thanks for joining me. Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to the preview, the Tooele County preview. Today we're going to be talking about two schools, Stansbury High School and Grantsville High School. Tooele High School played their playoff game last week, and they were unsuccessful, so they are no longer in the playoff picture. But congratulations to them on their season. But hey, we already covered that one, so now we're going to focus on Stansbury and Grantsville. All right, so let's get into Stansbury first. Mainly because I know the least about them, so the conversation is probably not going to be as in depth as I would like. All right, but so the Stansbury Stallions will be at home. The 7-3 Stansbury Stallions will be at home this week, Friday, November 1st at 6 p.m. Unless that changes for whatever reason. That's what was listed originally, against the Desert Hills Thunder from St. George, who are also 7-3 on the season. Now, passing plays for these teams. Desert Hills calls about 38% pass and 62% run, with 200 on the pass plays on the season, 321 rushing plays on the season. Meanwhile, Stansbury is very similar, with 36% passing plays and 64% rushing plays. 181 passing, 326 rushing. To be honest with you, looking at these stat lines for these two schools, they're almost like the same dang team. I mean, it's kind of crazy looking at the stat lines and putting it all together. It was very, very, very similar in a lot of ways. So points for, Stansbury's got 317 points on the season, averaging 31 per game, while Desert Hills is sitting at 326 points on the season, averaging 32 points a game. 326. I don't know if I said that right. In terms of points allowed, the Stallions have allowed 148 points on the season, averaging 14 per game. And the Thunder have allowed 179, averaging about 17 to 18 points a game. So pretty comparable in both those stats for those two teams. It's rather interesting. Passing yards for the Stallions, they're sitting at 1,745 yards on the season for an average of 174 passing yards a game. The Thunder are very similar at 1,723 yards, averaging 172 yards a game. Passing yards allowed for the Stallions, they've allowed 1,650, averaging 165 a game, and passing yards for the Thunder. And this is only based off of 9 games, because not all their opponents posted stats, okay? They're sitting at 1,482 passing yards allowed on the season for an average of 164 yards per game. Rushing yards for the Stallions, they're sitting at 2,079 yards on the season. Good job for them. Desert Hills is sitting at 2,352. So both of those teams averaging above 200 yards per game on the ground. So very comparable. So far, very comparable stat lines. It's very interesting to see. Rushing yards allowed by each team. Again, for Desert Hills, they only had 9 games worth of stats because not every team posted stats, okay? They're sitting at 1,230 yards allowed on the ground this year for an average of 136 yards per game. Meanwhile, the Stallions are sitting at 1,027 yards on the ground allowed, averaging 102. Okay, so that could be problematic for both teams, as both teams appear to be run heavy at 60+% of their play calls being run plays. All right, sacks for each team. The Stallions have 13 sacks on the season. Meanwhile, Desert Hills has a staggering 29 sacks a season. They're averaging just about 3 sacks a game. That could be very problematic for the Stallions. Sacks allowed. Stansbury has allowed 11 sacks so far on the season, and Desert Hills has allowed 8, but again, only based off of 9 games of stats, and I don't think every single team put totals in for sacks. They were usually pretty good about passing and rushing, but when it came to the intangibles, not every team puts those in. In terms of interceptions, defensive interceptions, the Stallions have 13 takeaways on the season, as does Desert Hills. Both of those teams sitting at 13 interceptions on the season from their defense. Their offensive interceptions are equally the same, with Stansbury sitting at 5 passing interceptions and Desert Hills sitting at 5 passing interceptions. So it was very interesting to look at those stats and see how comparable those two teams are. I mean, it's almost identical. And to be honest, it's kind of the theme, per the stats at least. It's kind of the theme for the Grantsville playoff game too. But we'll get into that. Obviously, this is Stansbury. So, but it is interesting to see how comparable they really are. So, gosh, I mean, it could just be a stalemate. You know, it might come down to field goals. It might come down to just which defense makes the bigger play. You know, maybe one of them gets another interception and takes it back. I mean, it might come down to something like that. But let's get into the quarterback comparison for the Stallions and the Thunder. Okay, so for Stansbury, you got number 4, Dearden, the senior. He's 75 for 145 on the season, 1,252 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. He's also got 64 carries for 436 yards and 6 touchdowns. Meanwhile, for the Thunder, you got number 9, Grondel. He's also a senior. He's 128 for 197 on the season, 1,690 yards, 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He too has 64 carries for 378 yards and 3 touchdowns. So same amount of carries, pretty equal. I mean, he's not quite equal, but pretty close in yardage, and 3 less touchdowns. Seriously, like the comparisons of how close these teams kind of are to each other is really, really staggering. For the rushing comparison, you've got number 2 for the Stallions, Ferry, the senior. He's got 131 carries for 758 yards, 7 touchdowns. He's also got 16 receptions for 163 yards, and he is their leading rusher. Okay. For some more similarities, for the Thunder, their leading rusher is also number 2, Mason, the senior. He's got 125 carries, 1,078 yards, 18 total touchdowns, 18 touchdowns on the ground, 14 receptions for 163 yards and 4 touchdowns. So he's a dual threat for them, at least in terms of I mean, they're both dual threats. You know, they both have 163 yards. I'm looking at this and I'm really starting. I have to double check all the time to see if maybe I'm doing a typo because there's so many similarities. Yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. But that's your rushing comparison. In terms of your wide receiver comparison, for receiving, for the Stallions, you got number 1, Rich. He's a senior. He's got 36 receptions on the season for 675 yards, 76 yards being his longest, and 6 touchdowns. Meanwhile, for the Thunder, number 32, Wintle. He's also a senior. 32 receptions for 535 yards, 35 being his longest, and 3 touchdowns. So offensively, very, very comparable, right? And I think that kind of comes back to the fact that, I mean, down to their balance of how they call pass rush run, very similar. You know, and I guess the biggest question is how much of that is just a reflection of them being up on the scoreboard, and they just run the ball more as a result of that, or if that's truly their design. I mean, it's really staggering. On the defensive side of the ball, though, your total tackles leader for the Stallions is number 23, Olsen. He's a senior. He's got 79 total tackles, 41 solo, and 1 tackle for loss. Meanwhile, for the Thunder, number 0, Meredith. He's a junior. He's got 59 total tackles, 26 solo, 4 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. Your sack leaders for each team. For the Stallions, you got number 6, Wilson, the senior. He's got 8 sacks on the season. For the Thunder, you got number 1, Mooy, Mooy. I probably said that wrong. Both those individuals he's a senior as well. He's got a staggering 13 sacks on the season, so he's doing a phenomenal job getting into that backfield and being disruptive. In terms of interceptions, the interception leader for the Stallions is number 18, Binkley. He's a senior. He's got 3 interceptions on the year. And for the Thunder, number 33, I love to see it, 33, by the way, Polu. He's a senior. He's got 2 interceptions returned for 35 yards, 3 passes deflected, and 1 fumble recovery. Now, your oddball, I mean, that's kind of a horrible way to say it, right? But your potentially the two guys that can make a difference in this game, depending on how these defenses play each other. Your field goal comparison for the Stallions, you got number 34, Clegg. He's a junior. He's 1 for 1 on field goals this year, with 34 being his longest. And for the Thunder, they've got number 30, Porter. He's also a junior. He's 2 for 5 on the year, and 31 being his longest. So, Stansbury doesn't seem to kick many field goals. It haven't probably really needed to. Point after tries, both these guys were pretty comparable. They've missed a couple here and there, but nothing staggering that you look at and you're just like, oh man, these guys can't kick, right? So I'm inclined to believe that they can kick the ball. 2 for 5, obviously for Desert Hills, they're struggling a little bit there, but that doesn't, maybe they were trying outside of his range, just trying to see what he could do. Who knows? But those are your stat leaders in your comparable positions. Like I said, we kind of went over the stats already. I do find it interesting how closely comparable these two teams are. The one thing that I had to kind of come back on and give Stansbury some recognition on, because I hadn't seen them play yet. I was just looking at stat lines, is how solid their defense really is. I mean, they do a really good job. If you're looking at the passing yards allowed, I mean, they're averaging 165 passing yards allowed in a game. And, they played a couple teams, and I'll just go to the Chihuahua team, right? The Chihuahua game, I really expected that Chihuahua was going to be in that fight a little bit more. And a lot of that was based off the fact that I hadn't quite seen Stansbury's varsity team play, right? And they did a very good job, with stopping the run, which was Chihuahua's bread and butter, So, I mean, even on the season, Stansbury's only averaging 102 yards rushing on the ground. So very good there. But Desert Hills is very equal, right? And so with both these teams being predominantly run play, I don't think we're going to see that in this game. I think you're going to see the ball in the air a little bit more. Defensively in terms of interceptions, they're equal. So it could go either way. I mean, it really could. What's his number? Number 9 for Desert Hills. He's got about 50 more attempts on the season. So they're probably more inclined to pass it. But I mean, these guys are literally very equal, in their passing and their scrambling capabilities. The only thing that might be a difference maker, and I say this from having, watched plenty of the JV and then watching the varsity team as well, right? And seeing how they kind of they'll swap out Dearden and Rutzel, right? Dearden can throw the ball. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to knock him when I say this, but I think Rutzel's going to be more of a deep throw threat, and they both can scramble. So, I mean, that might be the saving grace for the Stallions. And, just looking at these stats, obviously, right? That might be the saving grace, is that having the benefit of having two quarterbacks with similar but different enough play styles that maybe throws a wrench in the defense of Desert Hills. It's going to be interesting to see. I'm really looking forward to it. Obviously I'm going to be seeing it secondhand, but I am looking forward to seeing what they do, because I owe Stansbury an apology in some regards, because I know leading up to the Park City game that they played, I covered it, but based off of the stats and everything that I was seeing for Park City, I didn't know that Stansbury really had much of a shot in that one. And they went out there and did a very good job against a very good team. And they've held on to that. It wasn't a fluke win. They've continued to win. So I owe them an apology, because actually having seen them play, like I said, their defense really impressed me. So that is your Stansbury matchup. That game will be on Friday in Stansbury. And that's another factor too, right? I mean, Desert Hills is from St. George. So if you're not familiar with it, if you're listening to this and you're not really familiar with our area, that's a 4.5, 5 hour drive, roughly, give or take. Maybe a little bit more, right? On bus, it might be even more, because I know it's about 6 hours to Vegas. So, depending on who's driving, you might make it in 3. But, it's a pretty good distance. And is that going to be a factor for Desert Hills? By the time they get up here, are they going to be just, jet lagged, for lack of a better phrase? You know what I mean? It's a very real thing. It's a very real factor going into the game. And not to mention, the weather here in the Chihuahua County area is looking like it's going to be cold, wet, maybe even a little snowy. So a team from St. George, not accustomed to a lot of snow, a lot of cold. I mean, it gets cold for them, but their cold is our warm. You know what I mean? So, all those things play a factor in it. And, for two teams that are run heavy and two teams that statistically do very well against the run, I think it could be very interesting. Very interesting. So that is your Stansbury Stallions matchup for this week for their playoff game. Again, Friday, November 1st at 6 p.m. It might change. They changed one on me last week I wasn't prepared for, and I didn't know about it, or else I would have put it out there. Not that it would have really mattered, but so based off the information that I have, 6 p.m. for that game, November 1st in Stansbury. So if you're in the area and you have the opportunity, go check them out, okay? Good luck to you guys. I can't wait to see it because, like I said, you guys are very, very close statistically. So thank you for listening to Unaffiliated Sports Broadcast. You can follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Unaffiliated Sports Broadcast. The podcast is available on iHeart, Spreaker, Spotify, Amazon Music. So for all the updates, please follow the Instagram page as we post the updates there, as well as the stats for these amazing young athletes. I hope you enjoyed the show, and until next time, please take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you later.